I wondered who you were talking about. My name's Steve Mitchell. I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here. Appreciate the groceries. I used to be homeless. Eat every chance I get. Anyway, I guess what we're celebrating is, if you wanted to cut right to the chase, it doesn't appreciate anything that the group's done. The group's done a lot of stuff, and people have done a lot of stuff over the last 17 years. But what we're really celebrating tonight is that Alcoholics Anonymous practices the way of life is more powerful than the illness of alcoholism. That's the good news. As far as I know, we've only got 2 things we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. There might be 1,000 different things, but it all comes back under everything we do. As far as I know, I've said this all over North America. Nobody's ever checked it. As far as I know, we do everything to stay sober or to carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Everything comes back under one of those things. So I'm a member of the principals group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Raleigh. My sobriety date's May 26, 1975. I'm shocked by that myself. This just doesn't seem possible. I talked to a guy I sobered up with a while back, and I gave him the name. I gave him the name back maybe like in the early summer of 1975. I gave him the name Big Harold because he's almost 6 foot tall and he weighed 116 pounds when he came into AA. He looked like a prisoner of war. And he said the first time he saw me, he told his wife, "There's one that's really hurting." So, I don't know what I must have looked like, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't good. So what I'm going to do tonight, it's going to take me a couple hours here. I'd be here by myself, wouldn't I? Yeah. No doubt. I'm absolutely convinced nobody's ever drank in Aberdeen, North Carolina after about 8:15 at night. So, North Carolina is pretty serious about bell ringer meetings now. There is a sizable amount of the AA world that has an hour-and-a-half meetings every time they meet. Some are an hour and 45 minutes, but we're pretty serious in North Carolina about stopping. I mean, when you get about 8 or 9 minutes till that closing thing, they think you better start shutting this thing down. We get too holy if we're here much longer. I appreciate the kind words, Kurt. I appreciate the invitation. It's nice to have things to do. And I'll tell you, this isn't the first time I've tried to do something like this, but I'll assure you, I have never gotten used to the idea that somebody would pop me across the country or have me drive 75 miles or whatever it is that would think I have something to offer. And that's nice. It's nice that someone would think of you and that... Because what we live and breathe on. I was at a meeting Monday night and this lady was joking, and she said that before the meeting she said she needed coffee in the morning like she needed oxygen. Well, that's how we need the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's how bad we need that. That's how bad I need this today. My need has never changed. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd been homeless for a couple years. I was hemorrhaging blood. Every time I went to the bathroom, blood came out. When I vomited, blood came out. I'd been seeing just a little bit before that. I'd been seeing and hearing things that weren't there. My feet were all swollen up. I was 25, almost 26 years old, so I popped back pretty quick. To tell you the truth, my physical condition was my long suit. I came back pretty quick. There's a place in the book Alcoholics Anonymous that says when we straighten out spiritually, we come around mentally and physically. That seems just opposite. For years, that didn't make sense to me. It looked like I came back physically first. That's what it looks like. But something had to happen spiritually for me to listen long enough for something to happen. So I'm going to try to share my experience, strength, and hope with that. I think I can cut to the chase. I'm going to explain alcoholism best I can, real fast, okay? Some of you may have heard this story. I like the story, to tell you the truth. I have not lost my mind now. Stick with me on this story. I'm a pro wrestling fan. I've been going to the professional wrestling matches since I was a little kid. I've been going to the professional wrestling matches so long that when people found out you were going, they'd work it into the conversation to let you know they weren't real. I always figured they must have thought I didn't know that. Everybody goes now. It's on TV 3-4 nights a week. The WWE's got their own network. It's that when they have them at the RBC Center in Raleigh, I think they got another name on that place, but there'll be 15, 18,000 people there. They have it on college campuses, all kinds of stuff. But you know how professional wrestlers have, I think they call them cauliflower. You know how their ears look like a used eraser on a pencil? All twisted up. There was a young man came to my group recently, and both of his ears were like that. I didn't intend to do this, it just happened. I said, young man, what happened to your ears? And he said, you ain't going to believe this. I said, well, try me. He said, well, I was drunk the other night, and the telephone rang, and I picked up my wife's iron. And I thought, well, if he's been as drunk as I've been, I mean, that could easily happen. I asked the only question that seemed reasonable. I said, what happened to your other ear, son? He said, they called back. You know, that pretty well explains the illness of alcoholism. I've always been disassociated from other people. I was always marginal. There was something wrong with me. I came into the world separate, distant, fearful. Now, this is just me. I understand what Bill Wilson said in the big book about resentment being the number one offender, but just me. If I had to describe the illness of alcoholism and use one word, what I would call it is fear. That's what I would describe alcoholism. And what alcohol did for me is it took all that away and set me on a way of life that I could operate in the world. Had it not been for alcohol, I'm sure I would have committed suicide a long time before So in a very real respect, alcoholism, and a spiritual awakening through the 12 steps did the same thing for me. They did it so that I could live in the world. And I don't mind telling you, if alcohol still did what it did for me when I was a 16 or 17-year-old kid, that's where I'd be tonight. I'd be in one of those broken down country western bars. I'd have some half-dressed slinkstress in there with me, telling me how good I am. She'd know it was a lie, and I would know it was a lie. But the bar ain't exactly about honesty. You're in there about midnight talking to your best friend, perhaps another doctor or airline pilot. And, that's... I never forgot this. This guy's dead now, but he was somewhat of a celebrity in Bill's bar. I'm from Nebraska. I got here... I suppose this part of the country there's still some of Tom Iverster's spillage going on. Tom always said for years they forget you quick, but people probably still remember him. But anyway, quick story about all this. There was a guy in Bill's bar that he's long dead now. But he was somewhat of a celebrity. That's a story I had in my mind about Tom, but I'll leave that part of it out. But anyway, this guy was somewhat of a celebrity in Bill's bar. And I'm from Fremont, Nebraska. How I got here, Tom recruited me and brought me here in 1989 to work in the prison system. But anyway, this guy was telling me, he was somewhat of a celebrity in that he had the Nebraska Supreme Court had overturned a conviction while he was in the penitentiary and let him out. And that was enough in Bill's bar to give him mini rock status at least. And can't even hold me in the penitentiary. I'll appeal it, and next thing you know, I'm out. And but anyway, we're sitting in there one day, and I don't know if you ever had this experience, but I'm lying and he's lying. We're sitting up at the bar. I'm pretty sure we both know we're lying. So he's telling me how much money he made a particular year as a burglar. Now, the part of the story that's true, he was a burglar. Did a lot of time for it. But so the reference for the story was the year he was married to a girl named Karen. I knew Karen. So all of a sudden, it was like I had good sense came on me. I looked over and I said, well, Stuart, how much money did you make that year? And just for a second, it was like good sense came over him. You know the word affect, like something changed, like almost like something changed on him for just a second. His affect changed, like he had good sense. He looked back over at me and he said, well, it never was enough to make a living. And then he went back to lying and I went back to lying. That's just the way it went. But anyway, I come from a long line of alcoholics. My dad was as bad an alcoholic as I've ever seen or ever read about. He never even came close to believing he was an alcoholic. He told my sister one time, my sister next to me, he said, I never have been able to figure out why Steve had so much trouble quitting drinking. He said, I never did. Never quit. He told my aunt, he said, if anything can make a man drink, Alcoholics Anonymous would do it. And the first summer I was sober, he said to me, he said, the problem with you is you went from one extreme to the other. Now, I didn't know enough at that time, but if I'd have known what I was doing, I'd have said, Dad, I think that's the idea here. You're drunk and now you're not drinking. That's the idea. But I didn't know what was going on. But anyways, I grew up in that. Both of my grandfathers were alcoholics. All my uncles on both sides were alcoholics. Now, I'm from a part of Nebraska that's farm country. And tractor trailer industry's big. We hauled more cattle and hogs, butchered more. And they on the truck, they called them 48 states in Canada, where they'd haul them. And flat corn everywhere, and the railroad was big. And one of my grandpas on the farm was up. Now, these people were, I'm going to use the word, they were honest, hardworking people as far as right and wrong, okay? Like if you went in the store and you bought something with a $20 bill and they gave you too much change, they'd expect you to give it back. I was introduced to all of that, never afflicted with any of it, but I knew about it. But anyway, my grandpa on the farm, now this is not the kind of honesty that's going to get you sober, though. That's going to take cellular honesty, isn't it? When you come to that moment where you decide whether you want to live or die. But it's the kind of honesty of hard work, right and wrong. If somebody can't get their crops in because they're sick, other farmers will help them. Now, my grandpa, I'm not from the farm, but I'm from farm country. My grandpa on the farm had a creek on his farm. Grandpa would not go fishing on his own farmland without a fishing license. Nobody ever heard of a game warden coming out there. I don't think they would have cared in them days anyway. Grandpa said that's just not right. He had to have a fishing license to go fishing there. But Grandpa kept about that much whiskey in a bottle to get his right mind back in the morning. And that's the way all of those people were. Now, what happened to me, I came into the world with some really strange stuff. I always knew how to read. My last grandchild had just learned, I've just watched her in the last few years pass through that. I think Luca's 10 now. And I watched my kids learn how to read. I watched my grandchildren learn how to read. I don't think I was ever taught how to read. I just knew how to read. I knew how to read really good. I knew what words meant. I didn't know how I knew what they meant. Not just in context. I knew what they meant. And so they thought I was boy wonder or something, or smart. Now, they were disabused of that idea pretty quick, but they thought that. So I was fast-tracked. And here's what happened to me. In the 4th grade, they introduced a thing called long division. They might have well been talking to me in Russian. I couldn't understand what they were talking about. They didn't believe I couldn't do it. I remember to this day they took me to the principal's office. Now, it wasn't adversarial. It was trying to help. That old lady that was the principal of that little elementary school gave her entire life to that school. Never married. My teacher, same way. The old lady gave her life to that school. And there was another woman in there, probably some kind of a counselor. I don't know. It's a long time ago. But what they wanted to know is why I wouldn't do that long division. Well, I wanted to know why I couldn't do it. They didn't believe me. They didn't believe I could do it. Couldn't do it. And over the years, what's happened to me now, I've gotten a little arrogant about it. I've begun to wonder over the years why anybody would want to know how to do long division. I took care of a large budget in the prison system, and I'll assure you I never used any long division to do it. Now, some years later, I don't want to brag about this, but I'm a former ping pong champion of the Veterans Administration Psychiatric Ward, Lincoln, Nebraska. And I won that ping pong championship. I only lost one game. And when I lost that game, I immediately called for my headband. They sent it in, and I remained undefeated after that. But they had a young PhD in there, head doctor. Now, I'd already spent 4 years in the military by that time, and I with any kind of disability or confusion like that, nature has some kind of way. Things are, so I had figured out a lot of it. But this young head doctor, part of his PhD was in right brain, left brain, and what he said is you just need to stay away from anything mechanical. You're as smart as anybody else. Well, I had known that for a long time. I was in the military, I had just went in the military in the late 1960s when they had come out with disposable razors. I was so glad to get one of those things because I'd had a couple razors I'd ended up throwing away because I couldn't figure out how to get the blade in. If I get a flat tire, I'm just down till you get there. I can't fix anything. If I throw the switch on something and it doesn't go, I'm just about done at that point. I sponsor 2 contractors. Now, they've been saying for years that I can't change a light bulb, and one of them swears up and down. He's been sober 20 years now. I don't think he's right about this, but he swears I called him over to my house to change a light bulb. I don't think I did. I think he was already there. And the other one, now here's what happened with the other one. If you ever break off a light bulb or it's broke off, well, I'm not about to fight with that thing. I'm scared of electricity. Like I said, if I throw the switch and it don't go, I'm calling somebody at that point. But I broke off a light bulb. So I called Joey, the other contractor, to come over and get it out. He told me how to do it. I said, Joey, trust me on that. I ain't doing it. So I don't try to fix anything. It's just beyond me. It's just been in the last 3 years. I learned how to use my phone for directions. Revolutionized my life. You go in places now, and a lot of times they don't want to give you your receipt, or they'll ask you if you want it. I always say, yeah, I want the receipt. If you don't understand technology, you don't trust it. So but anyway, I grew up along those lines, and pretty good in sports. It's a small market. The town I grew up in is 25,000 people. Outside of Omaha, so everybody gets to play. It's pretty good, well coordinated, did pretty good. I had 3 things come over me about the same time. Now, you might survive one of these. You can't survive all 3 as far as sports go. I got a bad attitude. That ain't going to help anybody. I quit growing. That don't help you. And I started drinking. I'll assure you, those 3 things will shut you down. Now, age 15, I got my first job. Now, I'd had some little jobs like, on the farm. I'd had some jobs. I got my first job at age 15 as an elevator operator. There's some pretty old people in here tonight. There's people in here might be as old as my great uncle. I don't know. But you remember those old crank elevators, the one that you turned to crank? You didn't push a button. You turned to crank, and if you drove it too high in the top, it'd get stuck. If you drove it too far in the bottom, it'd get stuck. Well, I was a bellboy, a place called the Pathfinder Hotel. 25 cents an hour. But the tips were good. I bought 2 motorcycles on that job. Now, here's what happened. This is a long time ago. All right? I'm 72 years old now. I was a 15-year-old snot-nosed kid. I got my first older woman on that job. Now, I don't think they had that word cougar then, but they had that deal. Now, here's what happened. That woman said that she was 18 years old and she'd come in from the farm to look for a job. She might have came in from the farm, but it had been a long time since she'd seen 18. I sponsor a young man. Sandy knows him very well. I sponsor a young man, just celebrated, I think, 24 years. He got sober when he was 18. And so he was sober 3 or 4 weeks, and he called me on the telephone. This is 1997. He called me on the telephone and said he'd been in this class last night. Now, he's got married. He's an 18-year-old kid. He was in this class last night he was in, and he said, I never know how to explain this, but he said this woman came up to him on the break and asked him if he wanted to handle her. And he said, yeah. So he said she told him she was 29 years old. Well, she might have been 39. But so a woman just told me a while back that they've changed that word cougar to something else. I don't know if they have or not. But I'm pretty sure they still got the same thing. Now, here's what I know about that. In the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it says most of us have to be pretty badly mangled. Remember that? It says it right in there. Well, that makes good sense. It's not like I got drunk and then got sick. If you really look at the panorama of my drinking, I'm sick, I drink, I get well. Now, I linger way too long at the well, and I go way past stop sick, I go into near dead. But drinking was an absolute solution. Now, alcoholism, I'm not going to do a little tutorial on the illness of alcoholism, but it looks like you could treat it on a couch. Every meeting we go to, we say we read no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. I believe that. I suspect most serious AA members believe that. Everybody that comes to the podium talks about being in trouble before we started drinking. We all talk about it. Being separate from, confused, not feeling like we belong, something's wrong with us, we didn't get the lesson plan, all of that stuff. So here's, as a 15-year-old kid, I couldn't, at that time they wanted you to get your little girlfriend and go over to her parents' house, and then you go to the little dance at the school or something like that. I wouldn't have done that with a gun at my head. Well, that wasn't going to happen. I don't think I was capable of doing that. But now, at that Pathfinder Hotel, I could drink as much as I could steal. And you end up in bed with a full-grown woman, and you expect somebody not to drink again? I mean, come on. That don't make sense. I mean, there's no confusion in my mind why I had to be so badly mangled, because alcohol did so much for me. It was the most mystical, magical thing I was looking for. I mean, it was just the most amazing thing. And the times were different. I'd gotten in a lot of trouble. I'd quit school and go to California. People in my part of the country go to California to start their life over. In my family, now, removed from me, I grew up in middle class standards. And this big money, none of it was ever available to me, but there's big, big money in my family extended on both sides. I have a great aunt and uncle who have their name on the building at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Now, I was at an AA thing up in Massachusetts, and we were at a picnic. And the lady sitting next to me, you know how you strike up a conversation, just like it's something like this. You're seated with somebody to strike up a conversation. She told me she was the vice president of finance at the local college. So I was telling her about my great aunt and uncle, deceased now, their name on that building. And I said, I guess you'd have to give like $10 or $12 million to get your name on the building at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, wouldn't you? And she started laughing. She said, no, like 18, 20 million to get your name on a giant building at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. A lot of money. So there was opportunity. One of my drunken uncles took it. When he got out of the Army, he went to California. They gave him a job, a trade, and he became wealthy, and then he squandered all of that, lost all of it, and ended up in trouble. But anyway, I'm always in trouble. I do this, I do that, this changes, whatever it is. I'm always going to go somewhere else and do something different. And so I went off in the military. And what a mess. I actually paid a very dishonest recruiter to let me go off in the military. Paid him $65. And he told me that what he was going to do with that money, get as much money as I possibly could. He was going to give it to the detective at the police station who was a retired Navy recruiter. The only part of that story I know now, I didn't have much of a worldview as an 17, 18-year-old kid. Nobody does. So I'm dealing with my 16-year-old grandson right now. I mean, that dude knows a lot of stuff. I mean, he just knows stuff. Actually, he knows more than there is. There ain't anything ever come up that he doesn't know about. And that's the way I was. So I didn't know, but this recruiter told me to get as much money together as I could. He was going to give it to this detective. Well, I know what he did. There was a retired Navy recruiter that was at the police station. I know what he did with that money. He just stuck it in his pocket. So I went off in the military, and what a mess. What a mess. I went off in there in 1968. I stayed in there 4 years. I'm in bad shape by the time I come out of there. I had cheated on the test to get in there. The Air Force tried to make a mechanic out of me, an airplane mechanic. I've already told you, I mean, about all I can do is throw a switch on something. So I got put out of that school. The first thing that happened, I got out of basic training. They sent me to Wichita Falls, Texas to work on airplanes. And they gave us, I don't know if anybody's been there, but this doesn't make much sense to me today. But they got us all together that had just arrived there, and they said, this weekend, you will be allowed to go anywhere in Wichita Falls, Texas you want to. You're one step closer to the regular Air Force. You will not be allowed to go on Flood Street. And the reason you won't is the base commander's got it off limits by an executive order. Well, you know what I did? I got drunk and went down on Flood Street. Find out why they don't want you down there. And so I got, a long story short, I got kicked out of that school, but I couldn't have made it through that school if they'd assigned one person just to teach me how to work on airplanes. It just wasn't going to happen. So I go to the state of Arkansas, and I was there a year. I get arrested for minor imposition. I get arrested for public intoxication. I get arrested for drunk driving. Now, this was the Vietnam era. I had signed some papers saying I wanted, my first choice of assignment was Vietnam. My second was worldwide, and I don't remember what, you got 3 choices. Well, they moved you pretty fast in those days if you put down Vietnam or worldwide. So in January of 1970, I went off to Vietnam, and my drinking is, that time is just a blur. All the stuff that the paper's full of, I mean, it's just a blur. I don't remember a lot of it. I was very, very drunk. I mean, my alcoholism has progressed. You know, for years, when I talked about the progressive nature of the illness of alcoholism, and by the way, I'm not a word technician. You can use any words you want. I don't have to tell alcoholics to do that. I mean, if you tell alcoholics to do something, they'll do just the opposite to let you know they don't have to do it. But you know, our founders never used the word disease. That never came from Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. Check the literature on it. They called it an illness or a malady. But for years, when I talked about the progressive nature of the illness of alcoholism, what I was talking about was the drinking. You know how the drinking gets worse? You see somebody this year that you saw last year. Maybe last year when you saw them, they were hanging on to their job, or they were hanging on to their family, or whatever it was, or their teeth. I don't know what it was. They were hanging on to something. Now you see them this year, and all that's gone. Well, that's right. The progressive nature of alcoholism manifests itself most poignantly through drinking. But there's a lot of other stuff going on with progression. There's the rage, there's the isolation, there's the fear, there's the loneliness. I don't know if the loneliness of alcoholism is worse than other kinds of loneliness, but it's different. So it ain't got nothing to do with the proximity of people. I was sponsored by a guy named Keith Lewis for years. He's bigger than life, if anybody knew Keith Lewis. He led a combat patrol one time in the Marine Corps in a blackout, for God's sake. But he used to talk about, he's dead now, but he used to talk about laying in bed next to a woman he loved, who he felt like loved him, and they'd be laying in bed with their legs touching, neither one of them able to say a word because he'd been drunk and ruined things one more time. And that loneliness. See, the proximity of people doesn't have anything to do with the loneliness of alcoholism. You can be alone in your own family at Christmas time. I suspect if Alcoholics Anonymous isn't my deal, this would be a very lonely place to be. If you're forced in here against your will and you don't want to be here, I suspect AA is a very lonely place. You know, AA doesn't look like a very good deal till you get down the road a little bit. The first time, now I'm literally homeless. When somebody suggested I go, well, that guy from the penitentiary, Stuart Carpenter, told me, he said, it won't work for me because I won't do what they tell you to do, but he said, you might, you're desperate. But AA doesn't look like a very good deal till you get down the tent. You know what my reaction was when somebody suggested I go to AA? I said, my God, has it come to that? I mean, it can't possibly be that bad. Anyway, so I'm going to go through this real quick. I'm going to head for the home stretch with some stuff here. January of 1971, I came back to America from Vietnam, and my drinking now has progressed. I'm well into alcoholism. I'm that kind of alcoholism where I've been drunk. I'm one of those guys that took the morning drink a long time before I needed it. But if you take it before you need it, it won't be very long when you need it. Now, our literature is clear. The main problem, the alcoholic, centers in our mind, right? But it goes on to talk about the allergy of the body, and it doesn't matter how well I might get spiritually or emotionally. I don't know what you'd be at that point. Maybe a well-adjusted drunk. I mean, get drunk one time, that's over with. But I could never go back to drinking because no matter how well I might get spiritually or emotionally, the body is sickened as well. So I'm in full-blown alcoholism. So here's what happened. I get to Spokane, Washington in January of 1971, and I'm in a lot of trouble. And I become involved with some people. I'm not going to do a fifth step from the podium. It says very clearly, if you ever wonder about the genius of our founders, all you got to do is go back to how we were guided to tell our stories and ask the simple question, what is it a newcomer needs to know when they come to Alcoholics Anonymous? What is it I needed to know when I came to AA? I needed to know what Kurt used to be like, what happened to him, and what he's like now. Now, I probably didn't believe all of it. I don't suspect most of us do, but we must believe enough to get back to the next meeting. You know, I think surrender is what happens. You know, as I look back now, what happened to me when I was new is I became willing to take suggestions that I knew would not work for the simple reason I was out of any ideas of my own. So I began to take suggestions from somebody else to do what they said might be done because it had worked for them. But what our founders laid out for us is how to tell our stories, and that's supposed to be in a general way. It would be inappropriate. So I'm not going to do a fifth step from here. I'll just leave it at this. I was involved with some people that, just the easiest way to talk about it, they were outside the long arm of the law. And in March of 1971, because of alcoholism, because of my warped attitude, the hatred, and the way I was living, I was a good bit responsible for the death of another person. Now, what happened with that, my drinking just went on to another level. I don't think this could have been literal, because I just don't think I could get through all that maze of stuff. But what I told myself is that person deserved what they got because of what they had done. And my drinking went to another level, and I went to another level. Now, I suppose we all learn in the spiritual life that the more something is shoved down, the more violent it is when it comes back up. It's kind of like we learn stuff in the spiritual life, whether we are aware of it in these words or not, but whatever you send out comes back. If you send out trash, then trash comes back. If you send out love through these principles, then it comes back. But it's a bad law that doesn't work both ways. For example, how that works in real time in our program, it says that the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, has the power to actually kill. So a resentment will kill. But on the other part of that law is that I get served by trying to help somebody else, whether they're served or not. If I try to help somebody and I don't have any power to help anybody, my job is to try to help them. For example, Wednesday night, the Wakebrook detox is letting us back in Raleigh, so they only let 2 people in, 1 man and 1 woman. So a woman from my group and I, we went to the detox. I don't know if we helped anybody. I'm pretty sure we didn't make anybody worse. We ain't toxic. I told him, I said, if you ain't an alcoholic, you can't catch it from us. Alcoholism really is the only illness I know you're better off after you get it than you were before you had it. You know, somebody ain't got it, the next day they got it, they're better. You know, they don't look or feel that way, but that's the truth of the matter. But I just went to another level. And there was a very kind doctor. I got out of the service in the summer of 1972, so I was there, another 15 months or something after that. There was a very kind doctor. If anybody's been in the military that's in here today, it probably should be this close to Fort Bragg. There's 2 people in the military that are packing tremendous power independent of their rank. One's a chaplain, and the other one's a medical doctor. And this guy, he's dead now. It took me 20 years, I think, 19 years before I chased him down and made direct amends to him. But he literally kept me from getting kicked out of the military. He diagnosed me one time. He knew there wasn't anything wrong with me. I'm just drunk and sick, right? He put me up on a floor by myself in a tent. People were afraid to come up there. They thought I was contagious. You know, there wasn't nothing wrong with me. I'm just drunk. But anyway, I got out of the military in the summer of 1972. My plan was to come back to Nebraska for a little while, return to the state of Washington, and fall in full time with those people. I've always been grateful that by the time I got back to the state of Washington, I was a responsibly recovered member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you look at the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it repeatedly uses the word recovered. We have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. There's one place in there, I'm going through the book again with this guy that's sober 22 years. Good guy, he's had some problems lately, he wanted to go back through the book. But there's a place in there where Bill says a hopeless case of mind and body. Usually says seemingly hopeless. So I get out of the military in the summer of 1972, and I fall into a place called Bill's Bar. And I'm going to shoot you through Bill's Bar quick. You ever seen one of those bars where everybody in there needed to be in AA? You ever seen a bar like that? You could back a farm truck up to Bill's and put everybody in there. Bill himself had made his fortune in the garbage and septic tank business. Now, I work with a lot of newcomers. Daniel works with newcomers. Sandy works with newcomers back there at that table. I suppose there's other people in here. You guys were reading about stuff you do. You work with newcomers. I'm well aware of the fact that you can get very drunk in North Carolina. But there is one big difference between drinking in Nebraska and drinking in North Carolina. I can't prove this. I don't have any science. But just by visual, I think we got 20 bars in Nebraska to every one you got in North Carolina. There are bars everywhere in Nebraska. I've got one sister that stayed in Nebraska. She lives in a town of 263 people, 3 bars. There's bars everywhere in Nebraska. I sobered up at a place called Chapter 5, and it was right between 2 bars, a bar on each side. I wasn't allowed to go in either one anyway. So right up the street on the other side was a place called Bill's Bar. Now, Bill's Bar, Bill bought that bar as a toy for his drunken wife, Phyllis. Now, we had some colorful characters in that bar. One reason I want to tell this story is this is where the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous started to move in my life. We had a guy in there named Vibrator Hartman. Vibrator got drunk one New Year's Eve and burned up in a fire. We had a guy named Rodney Montani. Rodney got drunk, got in a fight with a guy in a wheelchair, and tipped him over. The way Rodney described that, he said, he hit me a good one, Steve, but I tipped him over before they got me out of there. And you know how people get loud when they get drunk? The drunker Rodney would get, the quieter he would get, and eventually his mouth would move, but no words would come out. We had a guy named Leonard Larson. Now, Leonard had no neck. His head sat right on his shoulders. And what Leonard would do is he'd crawl around on his hands and knees and lift bar stools up over his head. I used to jump off bar stools onto his stomach. Leonard went out in the country one day and shot a cow, and went out to the road to get somebody to help him load it in his pickup truck. He waved down an off-duty deputy sheriff. Ended up getting 1 to 2 years for shooting that cow. I don't know if anybody here has been to that roundup in Virginia, Blackstone. They've moved it because they lost their home for many years. One of the oldest roundups in the country. But I've only been there once, and the year I was there, I happened to be the Saturday night speaker. Well, my wife was with me, and she's not in AA, but I've just learned over the years, if at all possible, do what she says. If at all possible. So they put the speakers, it's a bad setup, I hate that, but they put the speakers up on a stage, at least at this place they did. Well, it's about 2 or 3 minutes to 8 on a Saturday night. I'd already climbed up there, and they had the readers up there and everything, so my wife's right down in front. They got a seat for us, so she's frantically calling me down there. So I go down the stairs and go over there, and I said, "What is it, Julie?" She says, "I don't want to hear one word out of you about that guy that ain't got no neck." And I said, "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind?" She said, "I mean it too. Not one word." I said, "What is it?" She said, "Look at that guy over there. He ain't got a neck." But anyway, the two most colorful guys that came in that bar were two brothers named Billy and Tommy Walker. Summer of 1972. I'm just out of the military. Day I showed up in Bill's bar from the military, my dad was in there drunk. Billy and Tommy Walker showed up there. They claimed to have been from Texas. I have no idea where they were from. When I met Billy Walker, he told me he was out of the 101st Airborne. I knew, you know how you know something, but you don't know how it's, you know something ain't right, but you don't know how you know that? It's like newcomers will tell you stuff when you're working with them. It's plausible, but it probably didn't happen. But Billy Walker told me he's out of the 101st Airborne. I said to myself, if there's ever been a dude coming from a prison, it's this one. Well, anyway, now Billy and Tommy Walker came to town. I started drinking with them. Now, I'm a beer drinker at that time, but I'll drink anything. You know what I mean? And at that time, I could literally drink beer for 24 or 30 hours. I'd be drunk, but I could talk to people. I could drive a car. I could remember stuff. But you let me take one drink of whiskey, one drink of Mad Dog, I just never remember. Now, Billy Walker drank dry gin and chased it with squirt. Tommy Walker drank bar whiskey and chased it with water. Well, when I started drinking with him, I started drinking that dry gin and squirt. Now, this is what Billy Walker said. I like to drink with these guys for a couple reasons. One reason, when I was drinking, I had a big mouth. Now, there wasn't anything going to happen to me in Bill's bar, but sometimes we'd wander off. Now, Billy Walker never was, I went up a pant size a year, probably the first 3 years I was sober. Billy Walker never was any bigger than I am right now, but he would attack people. He looked like that dog on the Greyhound bus. He'd just fly on people and knock them out, be the end of it. And the other reason I like to drink with them, you've seen guys that can get a lot of women. We all have. I've only seen two in my life that what it looked like is they didn't do anything. They just did whatever they did, and then pretty soon there's women around them. And my game, I mean, I don't think I was smart enough to abstract this at that time, but I look back on it now, I must have just been drunk, not stupid. I'll just hang out right here with you, Billy, and deal with the overflow. But anyway, here's what Billy Walker told me. He said, the way we're drinking this gin, he said, you always get the gin in a shot glass. Then you get a chaser of squirt. All squirt is soda. He said, never breathe when you're drinking the gin because it's nasty and it can bother you. So you drink it down real fast, swallow it, and then chase it with that squirt. You know, if you've ever got a good slug of that dry gin sober, especially if it's hot, it'll make you quiver. You got to be about half drunk to drink. That's what I'm trying to say. I said, okay, Billy, that's fine with me. Now the second thing he told me threw me. I ain't never forgot this. It ain't some kind of podium joke. He said you got to start to use a lot of pepper on your food. Now we ain't eating much in those days anyway. And I said, what will that do? He said, the way we're drinking this gin, it hurts your liver. But if you use a lot of pepper, it'll counteract any damage. Now, that's what he said. That woman sitting in the back, Sandy Lamprax, sponsors a doctor. And I asked Tanya once in a while, I said, Tanya, have you found out anything about using pepper on a bad liver? No, nothing in it. And Tommy Walker drank bar whiskey and chased it with water. And we were just wide open. So here, I fast forward. I come back, I'm running out of time. Come back from California one more time, late 1974, Thanksgiving season, I'm in Bill's bar. There's a lady and her boyfriend in Bill's bar that invited another guy and I to their house for Thanksgiving dinner. Check me on this. AA would be a very different place. There are many people that got into AA that other alcoholics that got them in here couldn't get in here themselves. AA would be a very different place without those people. It would also be a very different place without all of us that got in here because of non-alcoholics. We are still served at the world service level by non-alcoholics. Even a casual observation of AA history makes it clear we'd have never got AA going without the non-alcoholic. I'd be dead without my great aunt. Anyway, I'm getting to that. But anyway, Libby and her boyfriend invited another guy and I. I'd been in a terrible tractor-trailer accident with this other guy. But anyway, she invited us to their house for Thanksgiving dinner. Her boyfriend was a bull hauler, and Libby knew about alcoholism. So she had a great, big, beautiful Thanksgiving dinner. She had her kids in, but I'm sick now. I'm real sick. I wake up drenched in my own sweat, but I'm freezing. She's bringing in beer for me to sip on. I have trouble getting it to stay down. I think I'm going to get well. I get sick again. Blood's coming out. Both ends. Sick. Scared to death. And she had a talk with me that went very much like this. It's funny because two things are very difficult to talk about. Give it a little bit of thought. Pain is very difficult to talk about, and time is very difficult to talk about. I go home at night sometimes and I can't remember the morning, but I'll remember the last year. It's just crazy stuff like that. It's just very difficult to get to come together. And stuff, and to be able to remember stuff when you're in that kind of shape. But she had a talk with me that went very much like this. She said, I've been around alcoholics all my life. I've been married to 2 alcoholics. And you got to remember, I said, her and her boyfriend were a permanent party in Bill's bar themselves. You could get in Bill's bar by mistake, but you wouldn't stay in there by mistake. It's not the kind of place somebody would go in and have a beer after work. You had to be serious about drinking. And she said, there's a man in town who helped my last ex-husband. My last ex-husband's been sober 1 full year. He's got a full-time job. He's paying his child support. He's doing very well. If you want me to call that guy that helped him, I will. Now, I've been looking for a way out for a long time. You know what I mean by that, how you're looking for a way out before you get here? I've always thought that's why there's so many of us come in here so angry at God, is because we believe we've been failed by God. No, we haven't. That's why I've always thought so many people say they don't believe in God. They're just mad at God. I had tried to get help from God, misguided, of course. So I was very confused. But I had some plans on how I was going to quit drinking. One plan was I was going to marry a rich woman. Even as confused as I was, that wasn't looking good. The second plan I had, I was going to get a job. And day after day after day, I'd plan that out. Tomorrow when I wake up, I'm not going to drink any booze. I'm going to drink a couple beers to take the edge off, then I'm going to go get a job. And that would make sense day after day after day, just tomorrow never came. It's kind of like saying I'm not going to drive a car when I'm drinking. That makes perfect sense till I start drinking. Then it doesn't make sense anymore. And my third plan was to kill myself. I would submit that was a lot more likely. By the way, about alcoholic suicides, I just listened to a buddy of mine make some talks about some of this stuff. He's talking about the steps. Very true. If anybody that's been sober a long time knows this, I suspect, that percentage-wise, more alcoholics take their own life sober than ever do drinking. Makes perfect sense. I didn't have any problems when I was drunk. A good bit of the time, I didn't know I was there. Other people had problems. It helped me immensely when I found out alcoholism continued on when I wasn't drinking. But it also began to make things more difficult. AA is not a snakebite kit to keep from drinking. If you look at the way the program's laid out, it presupposes we're not drinking when we get here. And you don't have to be here very long before all those obsessions that made problem drinkers and troubled humans out of us to begin with are full flush right there. All that fear, rage, all that stuff, whatever it is, gambling. I can't remember the last 5th step I heard wasn't full of Triple H porn. All those obsessions come are right up in front of us. We either begin to learn how to live or what? Down the road a little way, take a drink or hurt ourselves. I think a lot of us probably take a drink to keep from hurting ourselves in some other way. So anyway, here's what happened. November 30th, 1974, a guy by the name of Bob Brannigan, I just talked to him on the phone the other day. He's in his early 90s now. He made the first 12-step call that was ever made. He spent all Saturday afternoon with me. I remember part of what he said. Not much. I know he spent all Saturday afternoon with me. I know I was impressed by the fact that he's a huge, big Red Machine football fan, and he didn't do the football game. He made the 12-step call. I remember a few things he said. Even though I've been around alcoholism all my life, and I was in throes of alcoholism myself, I didn't understand alcoholism. And I asked a question I guess anybody would want to know. I said, how do you get the willpower to not drink? And he said, I look on willpower a little bit different than you do. What I think willpower is the way you take that drink knowing it's going to come back up. I remember that. And I remember asking him, how long since you drank? And he said, if I can make it till September, it'll be 11 years. So what would that be now? What? 56 or 7, something like that. He's still sober. He can't drive anymore. He had to give up his driver's license, but his kids and grandkids carry him to meetings. I remember that, and I remember him saying that he was a sheet metal worker by trade, so he knew all the disciplines. So he built a house for his family, wife and 5 kids. And he said, I lost my wife and kids, and I lost the new house I built. And then he said, and I should have. I was somewhat taken back by that. I didn't understand that. And the next day, December 1st of 1974, he carted me off to the state hospital. It was 2 or 3 hours from there, and I needed a drink bad. You know how you need a drink? Not want a drink, how you need a drink? On the way, I needed a drink bad. And I didn't get a drink, but he bought me a can of 7-Up and a carton of Marlboro cigarettes. And you know what I did? I laid that great line on him. You know what it is? I'll pay you back. He was driving, you remember those great big Oldsmobiles and Pontiacs from that time, about a half a block long? Probably cost about $7 to start the motor on one of them today. But he was driving a big, I think it was an Oldsmobile. It was big, and you know how guys will hold the wheel like that? And we were out on Interstate 80. And I guess he took his eye off the road about as long as he could when I said that. Because he looked over at me. I think in reading, I think educated folks call that a pregnant pause. Never heard anybody use that just in conversation, but you see it in reading. He said, that ain't the way this works. He said, you'll be expected to help someone else when you're able. Now, that wasn't the end. From the time I was introduced, I got sober 6 months later. Here's what happened. I'm headed for the home stretch. Any of you that are nervous now, I'm coming in close to. I'm headed for the finish line. We're headed for the dance. I know there ain't a dance. Here's what happened. Memorial Day weekend, 1975. Memorial Day Monday is always a state and federal holiday. I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, May 26, 1975. I had 2 bottles of wine. You ever hide a bottle from yourself and you can't find it? That is what qualifies as a revolting development. I had 2 bottles of wine that I couldn't find. And I searched for him madly. Never did find him. The guy that drank him's dead now. I don't think they killed him. Probably didn't help him any. But I didn't know what had happened. I asked this guy, I said, well, what had happened? Just a few days later, he said, well, we were riding around with Richard. And he said, Richard's nerves are bad. Now, that could not be argued. Richard's nerves were bad. And but I always did pretty good with him. He said, we were riding around with Richard, and Richard told you 3 or 4 times to shut up. You wouldn't shut up, so he hit you. I said, Richard hit me? He said, yeah, he hit you right in the mouth. I said, oh my goodness, what did I do? He said, you started crying. But anyway, out of that little foray of time, I never have known, she's gone now, I never did ask her. But out of that little foray of time, my great aunt invited me to come and live with her. I don't know if it was 6, 7 days, 2 weeks, but it was in that little window right after I got my last drink. She was 75 years old, she was born in 1900. Elegant old lady. If she was a young woman today, she'd been a physician or attorney or something. She spoke English fluently, obviously. She spoke Spanish fluently, and she spoke German fluently, and she was a lifelong student of Latin because of her love of words. And she said, I have someone in mind who will take you to AA if you'll go. I was already going. I began to go to AA on a daily basis, and my life has never been the same. Now, it hasn't been orderly. is all over the map. I mean, I didn't work much the first year. I'm very grateful I fell into the care of people who absolutely explained this. What they told me was Alcoholics Anonymous is practiced as a way of life. Meetings are just one thing we do in AA. I think one of the problems we got in AA today is a lot of people think AA and meetings are it. AA is a way of life. Meetings are one thing we do. They're important, but at the pinnacle of Alcoholics Anonymous is the 12 steps. No identification, no AA, no 12 steps, no Alcoholics Anonymous. So those steps taken as a way of life, what they told me, they'll reverse a killer illness. So it makes it impossible. You can't drink alcohol and practice these principles to the best of your ability. Could I get drunk? Any alcoholic could get drunk. But I'm not going to just walk off and get drunk. The first thing I'd have to do tonight in Aberdeen, North Carolina, to get drunk, I'd have to get away from you. And then I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Now I could get drunk, but I'm not going to just walk off and drink. I've put all kinds of stuff in place to do that, to stop that. So if we can put all the jets of Alcoholics Anonymous in place. I'll finish with this thought. A guy said one time, if you can get to the bottom of the 9th step, if you can get the first 9 steps in place, you got a jet engine for life, because what you've done is you've wiped out the past. And he explained it like this. This sounds lofty, but if you grapple with it a little bit, it's very concrete. He said, there ain't no past and there ain't no future. All there is eternity, and you're pulling it right now. It's always right now. My problems have always been with the past or the future. I'm either angry or resentful about the past, or I'm afraid of what's going to happen or not going to happen. So the way that works in real time is everything, when I go to bed at night, there is no spillage. This day's over with. Tomorrow's a virgin happening. So whatever happens tomorrow, if I'm on that 540 bad traffic, it's the first time I've ever been on it. I'm not fighting 20 years of bad traffic. Used to be a guy where I sobered up. He used to say, if you don't drink today, you'll never drink. I thought, what's that guy mean? Man, that's deep.